Welcome to an SCLAA and DMS Thought Leadership Series. Before we dive in, here's a few quick housekeeping notes to help you get the most out of today's session. There'll be some interactive polls, so please, we'd love your input, and it's a great way to see where everyone's at. A supply chain maturity score will be available at the end of the webinar in time for the Webinar 2 series. Please do feel free to ask any questions using the Q&A function because we've allocated some time at the end of the webinar with Elton. And this session is being recorded and you will receive a link after this event. Now, DMS is a proud partner of SCLAA, having delivered a thought leadership series over the past 3 years that supports education and challenges supply chain professionals across Australia. I welcome you to today's Thought Leadership Series, Mastering Supply Chain Maturity with AI, from Assessment to Action. I'm Alice Brimicombe, I'm BDM for DMS, and I didn't actually start out in supply chain. My background is in management and financial accounting. But for the past 11 years, I've been with DMS, and I've witnessed firsthand just how central end-to-end supply chain planning really is. I've seen the challenges of getting the products made, the challenge of the right quantities at the right time and delivered to the right place. But when it's done well, the results speak for themselves. Remarkable results, up to 80% improvement in demand forecast accuracy, up to 70% reduction in excess inventory, improved service levels, and gross profits lifted, margins lifted. Often we hear the same question at DMS: where do I begin with AI? And it's a fair question because the truth is every supply chain is at a different stage. I mean, some are still running spreadsheets while others are starting to automate, and a few are already using AI to simulate outcomes and make real-time decisions. But no matter where you sit on that spectrum, one thing is clear. You can't move forward unless you know where you are today. And that's where maturity comes in, not as a buzzword, but as a lens. It's a way to measure capability, identify gaps, and align AI to your level of readiness. So today we'll unpack that practically, walking through each stage of the supply chain maturity and how AI supports that journey. To lead us into the heart of today's topic, I'm proud to introduce someone who truly bridges the gap between practice and theory. Elton Brown is a senior business solution consultant at DMS. He brings 26 years of experience in supply chain management, earned in boardrooms and on the ground, working with major companies across Europe and Asia. His career has taken him around the globe, literally, where he has solved complex planning challenges, driven innovation, and helped businesses turn operational chaos into clarity. Elton holds a Bachelor of Information Science. When he's not guiding transformation projects or giving demonstrations, he's lecturing on digital supply chain technologies at the University of Sydney. With his deep knowledge and practical forward-thinking approach, there's no better person to explain what supply chain maturity looks like in an AI-enabled world. Over to you, Elton.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you very much for that introduction. And for those of you that can see my screen share right now and can see me, that photo was taken February 2020. And for those of us in supply chain, we know how the last 5 and a bit years may have aged people like me. So that's why I look a little bit different. I really appreciate the introduction. And looking through the huge number of participants today here, the number of people that I can see that I recognize, I could count on only one hand, which it means there's so many new faces. Well, I don't see your face, unfortunately, but so many new names. So throw on the chat, please, where you're dialing in from, the city or town, or if you prefer not to share, just tell me which room in your house you're dialing in from if you're working from home today. I'd love to see some engagement, please. Melbourne, thanks, Tina. Oh, look at all that coming through. I really appreciate that. So let's stay engaged and throw questions on the Q&A or anything in the chat. And I want us to think about why we're really talking about maturity of supply chains now, and why does it really matter now more than it did in the past? Well, we know what's happened in recent years, and we know how supply chains are much more global than local now. And we know that disruptions can occur at the supply end of a supply chain, but also how there is so much more volatility at the demand end and anywhere in between. And so making really good decisions with speed and accuracy is so difficult when there are hundreds or thousands or millions of data points to consider. Which is one of the reasons my passion is AI, and it's AI for supply chains, and that's our passion at DMS. And there are many AI-powered solutions for us. I call us supply chainers. So I might use that term today. So for supply chainers, there are so many AI-powered solutions that are available to us, but which ones do we really need? Could we take on more than we think we should? And vice versa. They're the kind of questions I want to dig into today using supply chain maturity as the basis. And if we're using the right type of AI for the right level of maturity in our organization and supply chain, then we can make better decisions faster. So those are the 4 words I often think of when I wake up in the morning as a supply chain AI nerd. How do I make better decisions faster today? And if we can do that, then we can have a more resilient and agile supply chain. And we presented on resilient and agile supply chains in the Thought Leadership webinar series last year for SCLAA. And if you've missed those, jump onto the SCLAA site and you can see those webinars there. But of course, being more resilient or agile or both, and they are different, can lead us to greater financial performance across the business. So let's dig in a little bit more. And I'm just going to check on the chat. There's a lot of Melbourneites today. I wonder, I don't have the analysis. There's a lot of Sydney-siders as well, but there's also Perth and Auckland and some others. Thank you. Now, not all AI is equal. If someone says to you, AI, in conversation today, many of you probably think generative AI. If you're a little more purist, maybe, or if you've been in supply chain for a while and someone says AI, maybe you're thinking machine learning algorithms. And we all think different things because there are different types of AI, and there's no one concise, agreed global definition for AI, and particularly AI for supply chains. So because AI can be so different in so many ways, we can categorize it so that we can assign types of AI in terms of suitability to levels of supply chain maturity. And we're going to dig into those concepts today. But first, let's define the types of AI that we use for conversation and categorization at DMS. We think of them in 4 ways. So entry-level AI first is generally for automation. So if we think about AI 10, 20 years ago, normally it was to automate the mundane. We were told that when we had AI in the workplace, we would be working 5-hour days. That didn't happen for many reasons. But automating and maybe using analytics for some basic predictions. And then the next type of AI we tend to call operational AI. And so as I go through these, think about the systems or the technology that you have in place in your workplace and which level of AI maybe you have already. So operational AI is often using advanced analytics. And so you may have a BI solution of some sort, and you may be using other decision support systems, and you may have some workflows in place. And then strategic AI is generally guiding more strategic decisions and not just fighting fires and not just providing diagnostics and root cause analysis. And so it's often turning data into insights. And then lastly, transformative AI is AI that is often across multiple systems, or certainly very wide data sets, and that is using technology that allows it to learn and adapt. And so where you're buying from, and if you're buying or making, and if you're storing or not, those kind of decisions can change on a regular basis through near real time or real time integration if we have AI that learns, and we can remove the mundane and plan much more autonomously. So think about those in the context of supply chain maturity, because we're going to kind of match those up today and offer some exercise for each of you to do later on. Alice.
Okay. So when we talk about supply chain maturity, one of the most common challenges we hear is, how do we measure where we are? Before you introduce any technology, you need to understand your foundation. So supply chain maturity measures your organization's capabilities in key areas like integration, agility, process consistency, data use, decision making. The more mature your supply chain, the better positioned you are to absorb disruption in scale performance. So, this is really about giving yourself a roadmap that starts with a clear view of your current situation.
Thanks, Alice. So how do we assess it, and should we use a model? Which models should we use? I would love to see a hand up if anyone is using or has used the Gartner supply chain maturity model, or you can throw a yes in the chat. I see we have someone from Singapore as well. Thank you. And the Gartner supply chain maturity model is one that is quite well known, maybe the most well known, and there are 6 major attributes or areas where you can analyze various aspects of your supply chain. It is well known, but it has its challenges in that it's quite qualitative, and so it requires interpretation from experienced consultants. And so if you were to try and do a self-assessment on the Gartner supply chain maturity model, then it's probably quite difficult. The SCORE model, so some of you may know, if you're my age or older, you may know the APIX supply chain maturity model, which is SCORE now, and you may remember it as plan, source, make, deliver, but now it's plan, source, make, deliver, return, enable. So there are 5 processes plus enable, which is the positioning and assessment of those 5 processes. And so that's a very process-centric model, and it focuses very much on what is, not much focus on more strategic elements as well. But has some great content in there and is very detailed. The Oliver White, I would love to know with a hand up or a yes in the chat if anyone is or using or has used the Oliver White IBP maturity model. It uses 5 dimensions: planning, execution, organization, performance measurement, and continuous improvement. And it's very good because it's quite global and very well detailed, and very, if you are aiming for Class A, Oliver White, then you're going to have a lot of very well-defined processes that unfortunately require a lot of recognition of having the right culture. And if you are finding it difficult to change culture and get executive support, then that can be difficult. The Oliver White model doesn't focus so much on digitalization, analytics, and AI. There are other models such as the PwC model as well, the Deloitte model, and others, and they each have their strengths and their challenges. And we analysed all of these at DMS and thought about this, and thought about how do we solve those challenges? How do we make supply chain assessment really accessible to anyone involved in supply chains? And how do we help it drive our mission forward, which is to help local organizations adopt AI for their supply chains? And so we introduced our own model, the DMS model, which we call the DMS Supply Chain Maturity Score. And it underpins the detail that we have in our much more detailed model that we use at DMS, but it allows us to do this for free. If you want to assess your supply chain maturity, you can jump online and we'll give you the link in a moment. Many of you have seen the link already in the content from SCLAA marketing just recently, because I saw a bunch of people come through overnight dipping their toe in the water already. But we'll give you more details on that. But the idea here is that you can do your own spot assessment. You can jump online and you can do it for free. And because it's fast, you can do it in 5 minutes or 3.5 minutes, I think is the fastest I've seen. Because it's fast, it means you can share it with your colleagues in the same team or in other functions and ask them to do it as well. And then you will get your own personalized report at the conclusion of that, and you'll be able to compare them with each other. And you'll find that you'll have different viewpoints across business functions, but also in the same team. But you can also, to support continuous improvement, you could jump back on 3 months later or 6 months later, whenever you choose, and self-assess again and look at have you moved forwards or backwards, or are you stagnant? And then there's an added bonus in that when there's enough data collected here, because this is new, we'll provide anyone who's done the assessment will then get a benchmarking report where you'll be able to compare yourself to Australian, New Zealand organisations across the different dimensions that you're assessing. So it's a question-driven approach, and by answering a series of questions and thinking about them and doing it well, you can get a pretty good assessment of your supply chain score, and you can use that to open up really meaningful discussions with your colleagues, particularly across the business, around where there may be opportunities, challenges and opportunities. Now, I hope you're all paying attention. Oh, there's a few yeses to Oliver White. Thank you on the chat. And so let's run our first poll. And the first poll is, are you ready? You'll have 60 seconds only on this one. How have you performed a supply chain maturity assessment in the past? Now, this is a multiple choice, but you can answer multiple responses here because you may have done many. Now, of course, if you're answering E, you haven't, please don't answer A, B, C, or D as well. Of course, should go without saying. But for many organizations that are medium and large, you potentially run a self-led evaluation, and then you've contracted an organization like a consultant or an advisory to help you with that evaluation. So if you've done B, you may have probably done A as well. So I can see we have 60% of you have already answered. So let's get that to 70. And the results are very surprising. Yeah. Okay, so we have about 2/3 now, and that's a minute. So if you could show the results, please, Alice. I'd love to have a quick check-in on those. I really expected there to be a lot more that would have answered A and have done their own self-led evaluation using some kind of model. But the results show that, in fact, 20% of us here today have actually used a consultant. Only 11% have done it ourselves, self-led. And in fact, 2/3, 67%, have not assessed their supply chain maturity. Now, if you're not a practitioner here and you're a vendor or consultant or something else, then think about one of your favorite clients in answering these polls today for us. So it gives us a good feel for the landscape. Thank you, Alice. That was great. I'd love to keep going. So let's jump in. Now, let's introduce the DMS supply chain score. There are 5 levels of supply chain maturity. We would have loved, particularly I would have loved to have 10 or 20. And I would have loved to have had this online free supply chain maturity score be based on hundreds of questions across multiple dimensions. But there's a trade-off there. We need it to be easy and we need it to be fast. So analysing the challenges of all the other models and what we think is needed for the local market here, we've designed it so that there are 5 levels, and we've designed the analysis of attributing through question and answer to be a very pragmatic mix of dimensions. So those 5 levels, you'll see them in a moment. We'll go into a little bit more detail, but they cover from disjointed, which is, if you think of that as the first level, where you have very siloed operations, and you're probably fighting fires a lot. You don't have much visibility, all the way through to visionary. And visionary supply chains, there's not many around, but they're very connected, very intelligent, very adaptive, very self-learning, are using a lot of AI. And in between that, if you think of them as levels 2, 3, and 4, a rudimentary supply chain has some basic supply chain processes and technology in place, but a lot of manual processes. Defined, which is right in the middle, gives a clear process definitions, often has daily integration between systems, and will have best-in-class systems as well as ERP systems, but is using probably heuristics and maybe some basic optimization, but a dynamic, if you think of that as level 4, which those of us in stage 2 or 3, rudimentary or defined, should be aiming for dynamic. Is a supply chain where it is highly collaborative. We are using a digital supply chain twin, and we are using a lot of supply chain analytics. Let's jump into these in a bit more detail, but we're going to run another poll. So take a screenshot of that in your mind, or an actual screenshot if you choose to, because we're about to ask you about that.
Okay, let's go.
The next poll is, thanks Alice, is take a guess right now, because most of us on this session today have not done the DMS supply chain maturity score. You don't know what your result is, but I'd love you to have a guess now before you go and do the 5-minute exercise sometime today or in the next few weeks. And we are going to take a log of this, and we're going to present this in the part 2 of the webinar. We're going to present what you thought it was at the time, and then what it actually came out to be. I have another 20 seconds, and about half of you have responded. And it's roughly where I thought we would be. But no one is visionary. That's not too surprising. It is a very high goal to aim for. So that's a minute now, and we have almost 2/3. I'd love to share the results, please, Alice.
Sure, just a second.
So about half of you are at stage 2 out of 5, rudimentary supply chain maturity, and roughly evenly split, the remainders are in A and C. And that means about 20% of us are actually still at disjointed supply chain maturity, and about 20% of us are at defined supply chain maturity. In fact, there's one participant who believes that they are at visionary, or their client is, or maybe that's the goal. Thanks, Alice. Okay, let's move on. And I'll just close that. Okay, let's jump into those 5 in a little bit more detail. Now that you've taken a guess, you may revise your guess before the end of this session, but you can keep that to yourself. We won't be asking you again in this session. If we think about disjointed supply chains, we could talk about what it looks like, but I think what's more fun and exciting and relevant today is to think about the technology and the AI that you potentially have but even more important is the AI that you should be thinking about. So for all of those 20% of attendees here today that answered disjointed in the previous poll, I want you to think about, well, what's the kind of technology that I need to think about? And that is technology for data standardization and automation through rules. So rule-based automation, entry-level reporting. So analytics that's looking at descriptive, what happens, but also diagnostic, why did it happen? And if you look on the at the very bottom there, if this needs to be a foundation, because if you are a disjointed supply chain and you want to start implementing the types of AI and technology I'm about to talk about for supply chains at stage 2, 3, 4, and 5, then you may fail, or it may be very difficult. And VJ, yes, there'll be access to the recording. Thanks for the question there on the chat. So if you are a disjointed supply chain, you answered A, you want a strong foundation through automation and reporting. And that may just be by having the right ERP, bringing your ERP up to speed, but also having a BI solution in place, also cleaning up all of your data and having great data integrity and rule-based automation around data as well. If you answered B, which about half of us in the attendees today did, then this is for you. If you are rudimentary supply chain, if you don't already, then you should be focusing on adopting statistical models. So generally, you're going to use statistics to make predictions. They're very well proven. They've been around for a long time. You can use them for many areas in your supply chain, such as demand planning or demand forecasting, a step within the process. Also in the areas of inventory and supply. You want to remove the human factor of intuition, not fully, because it's very important, and that's another discussion, but at least somewhat. You want to put rules in place for inventory, so you have good inventory management practices. You may be aligning your inventory policies around time cover with segmentation like ABC and categorization of your suppliers and even your customers. And then your replenishment automation, you should have some kind of replenishment planning system in place to supplement your ERP so that you can predict where you need to expedite and defer and cancel, and where you're going to be out of stock or overstocked or lower stock, inside and outside your freeze periods, up and down your supply chain. That's rudimentary supply chains. 20% of us in the attendees today said that they have defined supply chain, which is level 3 out of 5. If you do, you should be looking at becoming more agile and more efficient and being very responsive to market changes and using AI to do that. The types of technologies generally, now these are general because I don't know which technologies you already have, but generally, if you're a defined supply chain, you should be looking at what I would call more advanced supply chain AI, which tends to be optimization algorithms, including machine learning and generative AI sometimes, to optimize your inventory across your network, and not just looking at that by item location, but becoming a bit more strategic about where I stock and how often. You should also be considering technologies to drive demand sensing. Demand sensing is generally looking at open, very short-term demand signals like open customer orders, and allowing you to make better, faster, short-term inventory deployment decisions. And so demand sensing you could only really implement using AI when you already have good AI-based demand forecasting, which we looked at a moment ago. And then exception management should really be used in any level of supply chain maturity, but your exception management becomes a lot more automated for a defined supply chain when you're looking at AI technology to use. And those exceptions are not just alerts, but they're much wider than that, and prescriptive alerts, making suggestions of what you need to do and prioritizing those almost real time. Now, there were a few of you that said you have a dynamic supply chain. What you should be looking at is end-to-end digitalization and having a digital supply chain twin. You probably, to get here, already have some kind of digital twin. It may not be modeling all of your key customers, suppliers. It may not be leveraging near real-time information. But it should be if you have a dynamic supply chain and you're looking to advance. And then visionary supply chains. One of you said you believe you or your client has a visionary supply chain. What you should be looking at is real-time decision making and execution that is highly autonomous. And then thinking about other areas that you haven't had the time to look at, such as risk management, risk analysis, continuous network optimization, which is an advancement on network design and optimization, looking at your entire network. And also other technologies that drive autonomous decision making around scenario analysis, control tower analysis, but also things like intelligent order response, where we can analyze customer orders, particularly B2B orders, and work out the best way to satisfy those, considering the entire digital supply chain twin. Now, of course, those are general, and that's based on, it will be impacted by what you already have in place and how well all of that is already working. But it's a great guide, and you'll understand more once you take the DMS supply chain maturity score. Now, I've spoken a lot there, and I'd love to run our third and final poll, please. And that poll is, what AI tools or technologies are you implementing or considering implementing to increase your supply chain maturity? I've just covered a few examples today. I'd love to get a feel for what the attendees here are looking at. And after today, I'm going to take this away and align that with all of the guesses of the supply chain maturity levels we had. And there'll be some misalignment there, probably, and we'll be able to analyze that and report back on that in the second part of this webinar series. So they're A, demand forecasting, B, inventory optimization, C, replenishment automation, D, demand sensing, and E, network optimization. We didn't have a placeholder for other, unfortunately, because it is a very wide topic, AI for supply chains. So about half of us have responded here, and it's been a minute. So if we could end the poll and share the results, please, Alice. Let me know if you need me to.
Yes, Elton, something stuck on my end.
Okay, let me do that.
Here we go. Yeah.
So we can see that in this example, demand forecast inventory optimization, more than half of us are actually implementing or considering implementing those. And about a third, network optimization. Fantastic. I suspect, I wonder if that's due to global changes in supply chains, but also wars, nationalism, tariffs, and the various drivers that have caused us to consider onshoring or nearshoring. So great to see that. Replenishment automation is only at 20%. Demand sensing, I feel like in this market, we are still behind in demand sensing, only 10%. Thanks, Alice. Now, I really appreciate everyone's contributions today, and I would love to introduce now to you the URL that you can use to assess your supply chain. Alice, did you want to cover anything here?
I think you've covered most of it, Elton.
Okay.
In terms of, yeah.
Yeah, well, if you go here, I know some of you already have because of the communications that came from SCLAA, but for those of you that haven't tried it, there's a series of questions, answer them truthfully. You can look at your current level of maturity, and you can see the 5 dimensions across which we analyze this. at supplychainmaturityscore.com. So in the graphic there, we analyze it across people, process, technology, collaboration, and strategy. So it's a bit of a hybrid model, and you will get your results instantly. You will see what your score is. You'll also see your analysis, which could look something like this to tell you where the opportunities are. And in this one, this is an example of an organization that has great strategy, but has lots of opportunity to improve their process and their collaboration. And maybe they're the areas in which they would focus. Now, I do encourage you, please, to complete this free online assessment, because the more people that complete it, the more value there is for everyone attending part 2 of the webinar. The greater the data set we have to compare and contrast and then benchmark against results that we'll find later on sometime this year when we have enough critical mass of data, and we'll release the benchmarking analysis for you. But this is like a mini benchmark in part 2, where we'll look at all the results gathered by all the attendees here today, and those that registered that couldn't make it today. So if you're watching the recording, please go to supplychainmaturityscore.com so we can look at those results and present them to you. Webinar part 2, and dig a little deeper into how you actually use those results.
Yes, and that webinar is on the SCLAA events page, so please do register for that. So Elton, we might just run into some, yes, Q&A, thank you. I do have a few questions that have come through the chat and some just direct to me. So I've got here, I'll go with consumer behaviour, market trends and supply chain disruptions constantly changing, how can companies keep their demand forecasting algorithms and rule-based inventory systems in check?
So Vinay, great question. I think that question before AI was such an important question, and just the relevance of it has diminished because AI is so good now. And what I mean is, in the old days where we used algorithms and we would choose an algorithm, I want to use Holt Winters. We would need to regularly assess that. Then we had the tournament approach or a best fit approach, which is a form of AI, where a tournament system will assess multiple models and will choose the best one. And there are challenges with that approach, of course, because it could introduce volatility as it changes models on a weekly, monthly, or quarterly cycle. But if you do move into AI first forecasting, there's various terms for it, then you move away from the challenges with the tournament approach and using generally ensemble machine learning models that are designed for volatility. You don't need to know the names of the algorithms. You don't need to choose algorithms, and the AI will adjust for you. And so there's been a lot of leaps in AI forecasting in demand planning. So you don't need to, but certainly rule-based inventory systems, yes, where you're using a time cover approach and your time cover is somehow aligned to a total resupply lead time, then that's going to be very difficult nowadays because lead times are becoming more and more variable. So there are opportunities to reduce variability of lead times through things like supplier collaboration, if you have a good supply collaboration technology. But if you just can't control lead time variability, then you'd certainly need to align or realign your inventory policies to account for that. So good AI inventory optimization systems now will analyze your lead times for you. They will calculate lead time variability, and they'll include that in the calculation of your inventory optimization. Any other questions, Alice?
Yes. Okay, let me just... Okay, so is there a minimum data quality or volume required to start using AI effectively?
Data quality. So certainly 20-something years ago when I started in supply chain, garbage in, garbage out was a term I heard so often. We didn't have enough data in those days. And then 10 or 15 years ago, thanks to the reduction in price of memory and computing power, we have too much data. Well, sometimes we don't know what to do with it. So the problem has changed. Now we have huge volumes, And if we didn't have AI, then increasing my data quality and accuracy and completeness would be an ongoing task, very difficult, that may take forever. And of course, as those of us in supply chain data functions know, it's just like your garden. It's never actually finished. You may think it's complete, and in the next moment something's wrong. But AI nowadays is so good at analyzing data and deriving insights from it. So where we have really critical data gaps, like lead times and order quantities and costs, then we can use AI nowadays to derive that based on analysis of historical transaction data, average selling prices even. So we can look at huge data sets using AI. We can derive data and make assumptions around that. If we do that, then we remove the issues with data gaps and data cleanliness, but it means there is some bias in the process based on how we've configured our rules, and therefore we need to accept that our data that will be in use may not provide the optimal outcome, but if it gets us 98% of the way rather than not getting us there at all, then I'm always a fan of removing perfection, because perfection is the enemy of progress.
Okay, we've got a bit of time, Elton, so I might just go through a few others. The typical transformation journey look like for an organisation moving from disjointed to rudimentary maturity?
Okay, so from stage 1 to stage 2, typically it's I need to get my ERP system in order. I need to get a transaction system if I don't have one. Or if I find that I'm still trying to move from stage 1 to 2 and I already have a reasonable transactions system in place, then it's potentially because that ERP is not designed for supply chain planning and optimization and management. And a lot of them aren't, let's face it. And so taking some standard off-the-shelf supply chain technologies and bolting them onto your ERP to improve visibility and automation can very easily move you to stage 2 and then potentially also stage 3. But first of all, you do need the foundations. You do need a transaction system. It's very difficult. Only 1 or 2 clients in my history of 28 years of supply chain optimization have not had an ERP system. So it is a very important basis.
Wow. Okay, just got one here on social responsibility. What ethical framework should organisations implement to balance efficiency gains with social responsibility using fairness in AI in supply chain?
Yeah, great question. AI, I feel like the ethical and sustainability goals of organisations. There's been a view in the past often that that they're in conflict with the business goals around profitability and growth, and it's been quite well proven just in recent years that that's not the case. You can achieve both, and so I think it's only thanks to that AI solutions are now finally catching up, and they are considering the impact on on alignment with regulation at least, and KPIs. For example, network optimization tools now will consider things like CO2 emissions, so that you can run scenarios where you need to keep CO2 outputs under a certain goal, and that goal could be a fixed goal or a variable one. And so they are catching up, and those frameworks are being built into the AI solutions, but it's just taking some time because it wasn't the priority, in my view, until recent years.
Okay, so I think that's it for the questions. So I just want to thank SCLAA for providing the platform for us to share knowledge and support the broader supply chain community. And Elton, I would love to thank you for outlining the 5 levels of the supply chain maturity and the impact on performance. And understanding, I guess, these stages is critical to business and looking to identify improvement areas and drive supply chain transformation. And honestly, your ability to simplify complex topics and provide actionable guidance in evolving supply chains is really greatly appreciated. I just want to thank everyone who joined the session today. We appreciate your time and engagement, and we hope we provided you with some valuable insights and help you reflect on where your organisation sits on the maturity curve and the next steps to take there for you. Now, feel free to reach out to Elton and myself on LinkedIn, and please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or you'd like to explore the topic further. Thank you so much, and we'll see you at webinar 2. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.